All right, today we've got a real historical head-scratcher for you. We're going to dive into the story of this major figure from one of the most pivotal moments in history, who somehow just kind of got lost to time. His name was Martin Bucer.
So let's just jump right into the mystery, shall we? This guy, Bucer, was a titan of his time. I mean, a key player in the Protestant Reformation. His contemporaries, the people he worked with, they would be absolutely floored that we even need to do an explainer on him today. So, what happened? How does a giant like that just become a ghost in the history books?
And look, make no mistake, we are talking about the A-list here. You've got an era that's defined by names you know, Martin Luther, John Calvin, and right there, shoulder to shoulder with them, stood Martin Bucer. He wasn't some minor character in the background. No, he was part of the main event, and that's what makes it so baffling that most of us have barely heard of him.
Okay, so let's start building our case here. Let's really establish who this man was.
You know what's really striking is just how much this guy could do. He wasn't just a scholar, he wasn't just a theologian, he was a powerhouse writer. His work was absolutely central to the Reformation. And his peers, I'm talking a young John Calvin who totally looked up to him as a mentor, they held him in the absolute highest regard. This was not a guy on the fringes, he was right there at the very heart of this massive revolution.
Okay, so if he was that respected, what made him different from the others? Well, the answer, and this is our first big clue, is all in his character. In a time that was just full of conflict, Bucer was, well, he was the unlikely peacemaker.
And this just illustrates the contrast so perfectly. The 16th century, it was an age of pure belligerence. We're talking constant arguments, deep-seated suspicion, you had reformers fighting Catholics, and honestly, just as often fighting each other. But Bucer's whole approach, his Irenicism, fancy word for peacemaking, it was totally different. He was all about diplomatic dialogue instead of angry rants. He wanted unity, and he tried to get there with, compassionate respect. Wild, right?
I mean, this quote really paints a picture of the world Bucer was living in. It was not a time for the mealy-mouthed, as one source puts it. It was loud, it was aggressive, and yeah, often it was downright nasty. And right there in the middle of all that shouting, you've got Bucer, just trying to get everyone to, talk to each other.
So let's kind of trace his path for a second. It all kicks off in 1518. He hears Martin Luther speak, gets totally inspired, and joins the Reformation. Just 5 years later, boom, by 1523, he's a key leader in the super important city of Strasbourg. You can see his whole peacemaking thing in action in 1529 when he tries to get all the Protestant factions on the same page at the Marburg Colloquy. But then you get to a huge turning point in 1548. Political chaos forces him into exile in England, and he dies there just a few years later in 1551. Now that exile, that's a key piece of this puzzle, so hang on to that thought.
But, this is where the story starts to get complicated. Because that defining thing about Bucer, his desire for peace, it was also the thing that got him the most criticism. So, was he a brilliant diplomat? Or was he just an opportunist?
So here's the crucial point. Bucer was willing to compromise. He was willing to find common ground just to move things forward. But you gotta remember, in an age of absolute certainty, of rigid, unbending doctrine, that willingness to be flexible, man, that could look really suspicious. So was it a noble virtue, or was it a fatal weakness?
And this, right here, lays out the two sides perfectly. On one hand, his supporters saw him as shrewd, sensible, and practical. He was a pragmatist who just wanted Christian unity above everything else. But his critics, boy, they saw him as insincere, way too malleable, and in the end, just untrustworthy. They argued that a man so willing to bend couldn't possibly have a firm moral backbone.
Okay, so we've got the evidence in front of us. A super respected scholar whose peacemaking nature was both his trademark and his biggest liability. So let's try to finally solve this thing. Why is he forgotten?
Well, maybe the biggest reason is just a simple twist of fate. I mean, think about it. Calvin had Geneva, Luther had Wittenberg. These guys had stable, long-term home bases where they could build institutions and really cement their legacies. Bucer, he had Strasbourg, but he was forced to leave. If he had been able to stay, would we be talking about the Bucerists of Strasbourg, just like we talk about the Calvinists of Geneva? It's a really fascinating what if, isn't it?
But look, this whole thing isn't just about solving a historical puzzle. The real question here is, why should we remember Martin Bucer now? What's his legacy for us today?
See,
Bucer's core belief was pretty revolutionary for its time. He basically argued that theology isn't just some mental exercise. It's not about winning arguments or coming up with clever theories. For Bucer, the entire point of faith was for it to be active and practical. The goal wasn't just to believe the right things, it was to do the right things. It was about actually living a godly life.
And this gets right to the heart of why he feels so relevant right now. Think about our own polarized age, all the social media belligerents. His approach just feels like a breath of fresh air, a spirit of compassionate respect, having an appreciation for the truths that other people hold, even when you disagree with them. That is a powerful idea.
So we're left with this question, right? In a world that just feels more and more fractured, where any disagreement can instantly turn into demonization, maybe the voice we need to hear the most is the one that got lost in all the noise. Maybe what we really need is that quiet, compassionate, practical wisdom of the forgotten reformer.